Monarch was there in San Francisco.
I think we are from a generation who grew up watching, Gojira, also Godzilla, and the kaijus and playing with the small kaijus. And I know you as well was a fan as a kid, so I know it's very cliche, this question, but how was for you, playing with the big Gojira now, in a huge scale?
It really is a moment where you have to pinch yourself and remember back to being a 5-year-old kid, and my favorite toy was a Godzilla toy, and playing in a literal sandbox, and then now you're an adult filmmaker playing in this big virtual sandbox. It is amazing. I think also very special for me to go to Tokyo and to shoot where Godzilla was born and to film scenes of people running in fear from Godzilla. It feels like all the movies I loved growing up.
When the whole city was coming down, these guys were taking pictures, like they'd been waiting for it.
You think that your father was working for them?
This stuff was in a safe.
The power of Godzilla is that it allows you to look at your world and what's happening in it and to invent a new story. And Godzilla will allow folks many generations from now to do the same. That's what the power of a great character is. And I think as filmmakers, we are so happy to be a part of this continuity, to be a part of the Godzilla storyline as it evolves. But we know that in order to make it work, we have to bring our own experience and our own world to it. And we have to say, yes, we're coming out of a pandemic. What does that mean? How does that inform the storytelling? What is happening in the world right now? And how can we use Godzilla both as a literal character and as a metaphor to understand about ourselves and our world?
You mentioned a very important word, the metaphor. But and I also think the human scale is also important, isn't it? Like, it's a character-driven show as well, isn't it? Like, it's a family story, a father that is not this perfect hero. So human this, isn't it? Everybody learns growing up that parents are not that perfect heroes. So how did you mix, the big insects that you also invented, the Gojira, and also, this family drama?
That was the magic trick for me. Was I heard that there was a Godzilla show happening, and I got a call to be a part of it. And I love Godzilla, but I wonder, how does Godzilla work on television? How does that work? And then I read this amazing pilot script that Chris Black and Matt Fraction had created. And they had answered it by focusing on the humans, by seeing this larger monster world through the perspective of the humans. And that it was about how these characters' lives were affected by the trauma of the monsters, but also by the monsters in their own lives, that these monsters, Godzilla, he's not good or bad. Sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad. It all depends on the context of the moment and where you are. Family can also be that way too, right? We have, we can hurt each other. We can not intend to, but we do. And so this show is so much about multi-generational family drama, all the mess of that, all the love of that. And that's what pulled me through. It really was the poetry of that and the idea of legacy, which is in the title of the show, but is in the DNA of the show. It's the right word to be there. It's all about how these stories that happened generations ago affect today. And we're telling the story about the grandparents and then the next generation and then the grandkids and how they're all intertwined. And it's quite a beautiful canvas.
What's Monarch?
It's quite interesting. It's entertaining to watch all the time. The girls go back and forth, back and forth. But to finish, I have to wrap. What was the most funny monsters you invented? Funny monster, or interesting, or weird? Because I love the crab,
They were all so much fun to create. I think because the process of creating monsters is just fun. I mean, it's one of the best jobs you could possibly have, because you say, okay, well, where's the environment that we're going to shoot this? And in the case of that crab, we were shooting in Hawaii. We found this really cool rock formation, and there really were little rock crabs running around when I was out there scouting it for the first time. And I thought, aha, that's what the monster should be. I had a different plan of what I was going to do. There was going to be a tree and a monster in the tree. And so we started looking at what are the coolest crabs, and we looked at the crab that was actually there, and then you imagine it at a different scale, and that's really how you build those monsters. You want them to be authentic to their place, and then you want them also to feel like you have never seen them before.
This is gonna give me nightmares.
In the beginning of the show, I was thinking about you as, you know, one of the person who have the biggest challenge, because it has to feel real. You know what I mean? Like a video game, and it really does. You know, I was waiting for the longer, you know, shots with the monsters, and it does feel organic. So how did you manage? I know it's such a cliche question, but how do you manage to, you know, integrate everything in this such a lot of monsters?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts from cinematography and planning your shots, and, you know, storyboarding, and, you know, it's about coming up with a plan and executing it and finding the right people to do the work. And that's, you know, it's kind of a boring answer, but that's really the heart of it. But like, you know, you want like our wonderful director of photography for the first 2 episodes, Jess Hall, had a quote that he was shopping around from I think it was a war photographer, that he wanted to shoot everything wide angle but close to your subject. And so, you know, that meant like he wanted to communicate this idea that you're so close to the action that you can smell it. That was what the quote was. And that's part of what you need to do. And then, you know, my job is really to be like, okay, well, we have this framing that's interesting, and we've got all of these like interactive effects, like a monster, you know, that opening scene with the crab coming out of the ground, you know, like I had an idea about what that was going to be in my head, and it was like not quite realized. And then you go to the vendor, Rising Sun Pictures in Australia, and they're like, well, let's put a whole bunch of sand on it, and let's get water dripping off of it. Let's get the light like glinting and sparkling off of the surface of the crab shell, you know. And then they took scans of the environment and made the volcanic rock carapace. And, you know, that's a lot of what's integral to making this stuff feel real, is like attention to detail and composition and, you know, all of that stuff.
But in the snow sequences, you made everything more difficult, or not? Because like you have to, you know, there's the cinematographer working on the snow, the actors and the monsters, you know, like reacting with snow. How it was more difficult or not? Like than the jungle. And
you know, the snow was really hard because, you know, you have a giant monster and it moves around a snow environment. The snow is going to move every time it touches anything. And, you know, and it's when it breathes, it's going to have breath and all of those things. It is really hard. And it's all about like paying attention to the detail and making, you know, testing things and figuring out, okay, like this is how much we want it to move, and this is how it's going to drop. And, you know, these are the turbulence effects that need to go into it. And yeah, it's really, really important to be detail oriented.
Move!
Did you work together with the actors, with the cast, understand, you know, the space and the movements and also the drama, you know, because without a real drama, everything is like a video game, isn't it?
It's a great point. And so what, you know, our directors would all storyboard their big action sequences, and then we would do pre-visualization, which is, you know, really rough animation with like low res models that looks like a cartoon. And then we would show it to our actors so that they understand what they're looking at in the scenes. And, you know, sometimes I remember there was one scene in the second episode where Wyatt made a really great point about the stakes of the scene. And so we like completely redid, you know, like the last bit of it to make it feel more real and to like get an emotional beat out of it. And, you know, this is a lot of times in like big feature blockbusters, you're designing your story and your emotional moments around the action sequences, where this needs to be the opposite. Our characters and their emotional truths need to drive how we design our action sequences. And so it's collaborative, it is, you know, iterative, it is thoughtful.
I was, thinking about all the production and the responsibility of bringing the Toho stories and the kaijus and all this tradition, to a new story. For you as a producer, how was, your biggest challenge, of putting everything together? I mean,
I think that we looked at it as a big opportunity. My husband and producing partner, Joby Harold, has been, in the world of big IP from Obi-Wan Kenobi to Transformers, et cetera. And when we were looking at this, we felt like the features have done such an incredible job of giving us our favorite monsters on a big scale, and looking at the opportunity for TV, we felt like let's really, look at the characters that we have to play with. And Matt Fraction, our co-creator, had already had a way in looking at this world of Monarch, which we hadn't really tapped into in the features, and brought on Chris Black, who had this incredible heart-wrenching story that he put on top of it. So when we look at the season as a whole, we feel like it's a globe-trotting adventure. We feel like it's a searing family drama. It has romance. It has all the good soap. And I think that one of the things that we really wanted to make sure when we brought to the table is that we were able to both embrace our monsters, but also give them something that TV does really well, which is this character-driven story.
Wouldn't have made it this far without you.
One of the things that I love that we do is that we look at who is a monster in your life. And sometimes that monster might be 3,000 feet tall, and sometimes it might be the person sitting next to you. And I think that that's, metaphorically, we get to sort of really grapple with what is a monster, and going back to the origins of Godzilla, and the idea that thematically it was representative of a nuclear time. And we sort of say that in our development, Godzilla has represented everything from climate change to COVID to just the monster that is in our world, in our life. And I think that can be representative of a lot of things, but certainly we have our own monsters that are characters in our show.
And as you mentioned, our deep fears are changing. Like we had this, real danger of COVID and wars and climate change, and at the same time, we didn't finish with the nuclear threat as well. It's like there's a fear, and more fear, layers of fear, isn't it?
Yes. And I think that the show, in the same way that in real life, we sort of balance sort of the exterior threat that is always sort of looming, and also our own personal drama. And I think that in the show, we're doing both as well.
And regarding, the size of the production, all the crew together, how was it for you? Like the Japanese side cast, the visual effects, which are great. And was the biggest challenge you faced, or?
We had such great luck because we have such an A team, and it's been such a pleasure. It's been, such a fun show to make, because we had our amazing line producer and EP, Brad Von Aragon. He's, such a solid person to do such a big show. And then Sean Conrad, our VFX supervisor, who had worked on the 2014 Godzilla, was able to really make our monsters feel grounded and real and part of our world. And then, our creative team with Chris Black and Matt Fraction, not to mention our incredible writers room. Like we've had such an incredible support team that the challenges have been just really making sure that it gets right, and not having it be, the scope of it has been a win rather than being something that was daunting, because we just had all the right players to make it all go seamlessly for the most part.
This is the world we live in. Monsters are an inescapable reality.
I love the way you both, as a co-creators, a family story, and the story and the secret also is kind of like a metaphor for, the way our heroes are not exactly what we think about them, like they are humans, this father figure. I wish you could begin talking about this, because it's a monster story, but there's this family story, which is quite interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what we wanted to do. And it's very gratifying for us to hear that that's what you responded to, because that we realized in sort of developing the show that we wanted to be true to the Monsterverse. We wanted to appeal to the fans of Godzilla and the kaiju, and give them a world and an exciting monster story that they were familiar with. But at the same time, we didn't feel we could, it was foolish to try and compete with the feature films, that we had to sort of build this story from the ground up as a television show, as an evolving and ongoing drama with a set of characters that you would invest in that would pull an audience forward from week to week to week. And we started with, it always had to be character first. And we came up with this idea of this family, the Randa family, who, and these two siblings who discovered that their father has kept the secret from them. And then that's the mystery they need to solve. That initially, it's not about the monsters. It's about finding out, why did our father lie to us? Why did our father abandon us? Why did he betray us in this way? What other secrets have he kept from us? And I think we both felt like that's a show we would watch. That's a story that we want to follow. And then as you follow those characters on that path, it inevitably leads them to the monsters that you're gonna want to see.
Yeah, that dad worked for Monarch is not his most shocking and damaging secret. It all starts from Kate and Kentaro discovering they've been kept secret from one another. Right. And that betrayal is so profound and shocking and hurtful that you can tell all kinds of stories from there. Luckily, we're telling it against the backdrop of the Monsterverse.
The monster is also, not only horror films or action films, monster films are good metaphor for our fears. This is it's obvious, we know, but deep inside, our fears change, but at the same time, we are always feeling the same fear, about destruction. And nowadays we face, climate change. Do you think our fears are changing? At the same time, they keep the same.
Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think Godzilla reflects that. If you go back to the 1950s when the first movies were made, and you track the monster movies through the decades, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, starting in the 70s, I think they become very much about environmental threats. And it's like, I think it's one of the reasons that these movies have been so timeless and enduring, is they, in every era, for every generation, they speak to something that we either fear or something that's important to us.
Yeah, and the development of the show is going on that, it's impossible not to think about climate change. But in the middle of our development, the pandemic happened, which became then another kind of level of allegory where this is now a part of the world has changed profoundly, right? Everything's different. How do we get back to normal? How do we get up and go to work the next day? So it's kind of the allegorical gift of Godzilla is, whatever our global anxieties are as humans can find home in him,
The world is on fire. If you want to save millions of lives, we can use some help.